Hey, welcome everybody to the Basics of Digital Painting. I'm Pete Moorbacher. The way this works is that every week I give out an assignment, and then next week we go and review all of the people that completed that assignment. Today we are going to start off. I'm going to give you an assignment, and then and I'm also going to talk about the new brush pack I just made. I'll show you what's up with that, and then we're going to go and review. We got 6 people picked out that I'm going to review their work. If your work comes up and you want to chit chat on stage, go ahead and raise your hand. I can bring you up on stage. You can do the text chat. If you're not here, I'm still going to review your work anyway. You can watch it on the VOD. All right. So first things first, we gotta pick out the homework for next week. I got a piece here. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. I'm gonna drop it in the homework channel later. So we got this beautiful lady here with massive 80s hair. And we got this beautiful 80s lens flare going on. This is a fun piece because the lighting is really extreme and we have a bunch of effects going on. All of these like glitters and shimmers and stuff. We got the shimmery dress. We've got the big lens flare coming through the orb. Damn, who doesn't love a good orb, am I right? Straight out of Labyrinth, Frank Frazetta era. You know what? Let's make that part of the assignment. Let's try to make this as like let's make this looking as 1970s 1980s as we can. Like, see if you can do this, see if you can channel the 80s through this even more so than the original reference, and have fun with it. Like, these studies are not an opportunity to recreate a photo perfectly. They're an opportunity for us to have fun. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to ask everybody to try to push their style this week. We had some really interesting entries. I picked some ones that are maybe not the most extreme stylistically, but we'll take a look at it. All right. Next up, I want to talk about I made a brush pack. And this is a real brush pack. I made a real brush pack for real. You can get it on the Huckleberry Gumroad. I set up the Huckleberry Gumroad last week. Everything's free. The plan is to keep everything on this free. Oh, you found the rest of the photo set? That's awesome. Thank you for the link. The Huckleberry Gumroad is a place where I want to gather up a bunch of free resources, stuff I make, and then stuff other people associated with the brand is going to make. The goal is to have everything on here free, $0, pay whatever you want. The money that we get in from it, we'll make sure it goes to the creator who made it. I made this brush pack because I realized, I'm going to make a video about this, I'll do this really quick. My standard brush has this kind of very particular flow to it where you get this thick, thin line that you can make that you can use to either like create hard edges or blend stuff softly. And it's very dynamic, but it doesn't need to be a round brush. Right? I had this version of it that did a very similar thing that was this kind of square spongy thing. So then I started making some different tip shapes. So I've got like a wider oval one. I've got a triangular one. So I've got a few different tip shapes, and I've like played with the settings to try to make sure that they flow really nice. I've done some like weird ones. Like this one is great because it makes a really hard edge on the hard part of it, and then it gets all bushy and grainy on the edges. I built a lot of these tip shapes myself from scratch, and some of them are inspired by some other stuff that I tried out. This flat one has been really good for building texture, especially Flatty Crusty is a brush I've been using a lot recently. It's a flat brush, but it's got the very similar flow and dynamics to my usual one. And then it's also even got some like texture on the inside of it where there's some value variation, some brightness variation going on in it. So it's really good at like laying down more fields of like interesting texture than a lot of my previous stuff. They're all size flow. They're all built on the same kind of philosophy. I've got 12 of them in total. They're not mind-blowing, but it's like the largest brush collection I've ever had. And I'm making this from scratch. And if people like it, I'm going to keep trying to make things that I think are cool, useful tools I would make myself and then share them for free with other people. Go ahead and follow the link. It's you got it for Procreate. It works well on Procreate, Bart. I didn't adjust anything for Procreate. I did go and make versions custom for CSP. Not available for Infinite Painter. It might work for Infinity Painter. You should give it a shot. Let me know. Anybody who's like got compatibility issues, glitches, questions, DM them to me. I am trying. This is in pre-release right now. I'm going to make a video explaining all of it in detail, and I haven't gotten to that yet. So right now, this is the pre-release version, and I'm improving it based off of feedback. So feel free to reach out. Okay. With that out of the way, let's move on to the homework. Vlad is not here. Knight is not here. Sean is here. And obviously, if you like the brush pack, go ahead and tell your friends, because getting more people to download this spreads the message. It'd be great. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Not too bad, and you?
I'm doing really well. It's good to be back here. You don't have
How was your
style.
Thanksgiving?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How was your Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving was excellent. I know a lot of people, they stress about Thanksgiving. Sometimes people have a hard time with their family. Mine is quite easy.
Good, glad to hear it.
So, Gabe says this may be a little bit of a nod to tequila.
I don't even know what that means.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't supposed to be.
You've got this cactus plant or like aloe plant in the back. What's going on?
Aloe vera, yeah. Is that used in tequila, aloe?
I don't think aloe is. It's an agave plant. That's what Gabe says.
Oh, okay.
Agave nectar is used for making tequila and sweetening. Like
Oh, right. Yeah,
smoothies.
they're quite similar looking. Too pure.
I think he's a fan of tequila. Anyways, tell me a little bit about your creative choices on Piece this week.
Well, you've been mentioning recently how I always paint out my original brush strokes.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to start out like loose and with a lot of line and try and keep my hand in the image. But yeah, as you can see there, the lines were ugly, and the brush, I think it was probably mostly a brush problem. Maybe I could have made it work with that brush, but I just didn't like the way it looked. I painted over that. There's a couple of layers in between that one and obviously the final one, but I just didn't like the way it was coming out, so I ended up just painting into it, and then it looked smooth and just like a study, so I did some other weird stuff on top to make it more personal, I suppose.
All right. Well, I have a piece of advice that I've been giving to you over and over again. I feel like it boils down to like 2 words. And this week, I want to give the same advice again, and it is do less. My first reaction when I saw this was I was like, wow, I've never seen like something that feels like sketchy line work from you. Or maybe I have and I didn't remember, but it feels so far apart from what I'm used to seeing from you. And I really like the way it looks. I feel like I do see your hand in the work quite a bit here. And you're making a lot of choices and you have certain instincts. And there's just like a lot going on here that feels like an artist at work. And I do wonder if you were to keep some of these sort of heavy-handed drawing, shading choices and preserve more of them, like how possible that would be, because I'm just really curious what that would look like, because I know you spend so much time rendering and refining and doing all these details, but like I think the rough version, I don't really feel like I've seen so much of the rough versions of your work, and I really like it. I think there's a real aesthetic there that is worth preserving, and I mean you've definitely brought the face more in line with the original likeness. Let me take a look at that really quick. Like, I think that the likeness improved as a result of the additional rendering work you did and the little corrections. But I just, we're going to look like, when we look at Vlad's later, like, his starts off very, very rough, sort of on purpose. And then slowly, like, makes a lot of these fixes over time, but still leaves a certain amount of the looseness. And I think you're capable of that too. I think that it's worth experimenting with. I like when I think about styles, I think more about, mark making than I think about like extras being thrown in. So I think the pattern work is very cool. I like these little organic shapes. but all of the stuff that you're building beyond the original reference, I feel like is not necessary for you to show the best parts of your work. And so, I found that this was actually really insightful as far as what your style is, almost more so than this one. Does that make any sense?
Yes, but I usually wouldn't start a portrait with pencil, so
Yeah.
I wonder. Obviously, there's ways to maintain painterliness without using line and pencil to show that.
Mhm.
And yeah, I also agree. Like I did that. I remember a while ago we did the line work based bird, and I did that in pencil.
Mhm.
But it was I don't know, just something about this brush that I used this week. That kind of that opacity. I just thought it looked bad in certain places, so I just didn't like it. But I do agree that like I could have worked harder to preserve that, and that was my original plan. But
Okay. Well, I think part of what's working here is the way you work into the darks with the light sketchiness. Like you're working kind of both directions. You're building up like kind of too dark and then you're scraping it back out again. And I think that there's something about that back and forth that's producing the effect that I like. And it's not very organized. Like there's a lot of strokes that are quite scratchy, but I kind of don't care. And the reason I don't care is because I think that the places where you have really like locked in and been very clean and organized with your marks, like around all the facial features, ends up drawing so much attention and creating such excellent focus. And I think like some of the expressive marks here in the hair feel very natural and flowing. And so you have like a lot of really good flowing marks that show your hand, and then you've got other ones where you're just kind of like being scratchy about it. And I think that contrast between them is part of what creates, a nice artistic aesthetic to this. And that's why I think that preserving some of that will help, because we've talked a lot about you wanting to render every inch of it, and I've told you I would like to see you bring more focus. And like this is what I mean. Like, and it may feel like it's not it doesn't feel like it's a choice. It feels like you need to like push the face further, and you're just rushing, right? You're just trying to be quick. You're trying to get it over with. You're trying to only do the part as much work as you need to so you can get into the next step. But that pushing yourself too fast and not like overthinking it is producing the kind of effect that I've been talking about. And so I often, when I'm doing like mentorships with people, I'm asking them to do too much work every week in an effort to try to get them to that same headspace of not overworking things, not doing additional steps to show more of their authentic style. And so I see when you're working quickly, when you're pushing yourself to be quick, you are doing interesting things. And there's something about that mindset, I think, if you can cultivate it, it might be useful to you.
And do you agree or disagree about the brush in this case? Do you think that that is worth changing? And if I were to try and do that, let's say, do another piece in this style, I think the brush would need to change.
So I just got finished saying I love size flow brushes, but actually for digital pencil is like the one case where a opacity flow brush feels like it makes sense, because that's how a pencil works, is that you get a more dense, darker mark from pushing harder. And there's something about that I think is very good for drawing and building up something that's like a drawing. So I think opacity brush is good for kind of digital pencil, and it feels like that's what you're doing here. If you wanted to tune it in a way that felt better to you, or you find something that has a little bit of texture or something that you like about it different, like that's fine, but I don't believe it's an ugly brush. It seems like a very simple brush. I like simple brushes. And I think it suits the goal of what you're trying to do in this step very well. And if there's anything that you don't like about the way that it works, the way that it feels, I think you should play with it and get it so that it feels excellent to use. That's my only advice about the brush.
Okay. Yeah, because I feel like I could find a better brush for it, but you seem to be saying like, no, actually, you think it looks fine, and the brush looks fine, and that kind of
For drawing, yeah.
the way they overlay.
As a digital pencil brush, I think that the opacity brush can be quite good if you get the sensitivity on your tablet tuned well. Because if it's too stiff, you're going to be really grind at your hand trying to like constantly get these darker marks. But if you can have a nice soft touch, you can get this mixture of like, dense and transparent marks like very comfortably, and I think that's good. And I think it's a
okay. I'm going to try and make a point this week then, leave it looser.
Yeah, and so typically when I start going beyond this point when I'm working, I try to preserve a certain amount of the underlying drawings showing through for a few steps, and I think that part of it is working underneath it a little bit, and then part of it is just like when I start to glaze over the top of it to try to like be a little gentle, because I think there's a lot of value in the structure that you develop with your drawings, and like it ends up being very informative for the work that comes afterwards. So don't rush to try to cover it all up. It seems like you think that I wouldn't like it or other people might not like to see it, but I would argue that your drawing, it looks quite good, and that you should like not paint over it so much and try to save it because it's very aesthetic.
Well, I don't. It's not necessarily like that other people. I just felt I'm surprised to hear that you disagree with me on whether this brush looks good in this particular drawing. I think that like the way those marks overlay with each other, I don't like the look of it, but I think that there is a way to do it where that isn't a problem.
I think part of it might also be if you don't like the scrubbiness of certain parts, you might be overly fixated on certain details that you've put out of place. And that if you find that you want to be a little bit more pickier about certain types of hatching that you build up, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But I think that you're getting a lot of very expressive marks in the key parts of this piece. You're really showing your taste and your eye in it, and I think it looks very good.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to try and keep it in mind for this one.
All right, great. Any questions?
Thanks very much.
Before you go?
No, I was going to say I did have some intermediate steps. I probably should have posted them as well, where it was like somewhere in between the painting and the drawing, but I didn't post them. So.
Oh well.
Fine.
Well, next time feel free to include more steps.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks very much, Pete.
Thank you, Sean. Let's see. Nate's on here. Abarth is here. Abarth, you want to come on stage?
Hi, Pete. How's it going?
It's going really good. How about you?
Oh, it's going well.
So tell me about your experience this week.
So I wasn't really sure how to do it in my style. I feel like I'm fairly new to this kind of stuff, and I don't really have a handle on what my style is. So I just figured I would sort of do it in the most like straightforward way that I thought. And I think I just sort of did it like I did a normal study. I've sort of been struggling with the color thing. We've been talking about that week, lots of weeks. So I spent more time with colors this week than I have in the past. You gave me the advice to experiment with lots of different blending modes, but I found that kind of overwhelming. I thought another piece of advice you've given is to just do things in the most manual way possible at the beginning.
Yeah.
So I thought I would try that. So I try to do just as much painting and color in a normal mode as possible. And so I did like most of the color work just in a normal layer on top of everything else.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you have these steps in here, and like speaking of trying to do things the most manual way possible, you have this very detailed sketch. You have a very strongly established like set of values here, and then you got the color worked up on top of it. This looks great, man. Are you happy with the work this week?
Yeah, I was pretty happy with it. In the intermediate stages, the gloves looked horrible, and I figured it out. It was because when I just did the color glaze at the beginning, the shadows were really saturated. And once I figured that out, then I basically went through and repainted all the shadows by pulling down the saturation a lot, and I made them look a lot more like leather. So I was happy about that.
Yeah, no, I thought the gloves came out really nice. They have a real like dimensional quality to them. There's a lot of subtleties in there that you've captured very excellently. The thing that also stands out to me is the jacket. It's such a simple thing. It's like the rest area for this image, you know, there's not a lot of detail in the jacket. It's a lot, but it is a lot of subtlety. Like the jacket doesn't just have like a few curves on it. It's also got volume to it, right? It's sort of wrapping around. We can see the sort of barrel of his torso here through the jacket. There's big shapes going on, and then we've got these folds kind of in between them, and it's not. There's not a lot of color going on either. It's a tan jacket. So, but the thing is that there is still like subtlety to the color. Like as we go from the highlights get kind of washed towards white, and we go to the shadows, they kind of get, you know, grayish and wash towards gray. And then in the middle we get these browns, and like there's a lot of temperature difference that helps establish the lighting. And so to be able to create this like round form to the body, you need to kind of get a lot of that color temperature and value subtlety correct. And I feel like you've done a really good job with that.
Yeah, I did that in 2 steps. So the first step is when I was first doing the values, I shrunk the image down really, really tiny to like almost the same size as the navigator and shrunk the reference down. And I sort of did the big shapes of the jacket then. Mm-hmm. And then much later in the process, when I was doing the color, I realized that there was some of the like background color on the top of the jacket. And so I washed that over very lightly with a low opacity brush to try to get some of the greens and the blues from the background falling on the shoulders.
Right. And so in the color version that you have, you actually, within this tan, you have, you know, shades of green in here and of orange. And then, you know, as we get into the shadows, it's like this super desaturated, it's like going all the way to gray. And it's like, I don't think that I think it would be easy for somebody who's not practicing art to realize that you've actually been fussing over the color quite a bit to establish a very plain beige jacket. But I can tell the work that you're putting in, and the subtlety there is something I'm really impressed by, because I know that you're fairly new to art, and you've been working really hard every single week, trying out a lot of stuff, and I feel like it's really paying dividends. And we see this in like a lot of the subtleties, and it's some of it I think is the academic learning that you've gotten from, you know, trying out a lot of different methods, but also it feels like you're getting a level of control that you didn't have before. And I can see, like in your comment, you mentioned struggling a little bit with the gaze, and like in the values stage, you know, the face is looking a little awkward. And while we don't have a perfectly photorealistic look here, there is so much more of the expression in the face as you've spent more time with it and refined it. And, you know, you said you did it just by very manually doing normal painting on top. That's really like where a lot of these subtleties and tweaks that like bring a piece together happen for me, is like, you know, working. It's not a series of tricks. It's just brush work. And that brush work happens slowly and progressively over the course of the final steps. And by reserving a lot of space for that, instead of worrying about the tools and the tricks, the blending modes, the brushes, whatever, and just getting in there and painting. And like everything else is kind of supposed to be in service of that. And it feels like by you focusing on that, you're showing off this like additional layers of control that you've built up through weeks and weeks of practice. And so it feels like, if that's the takeaway, is that working in a very manual way towards the end is like giving you a lot of results that you want. I think that's going to take you really far. I think that mindset is going to keep paying dividends for you, because that was actually the point where I turned from doing pretty good at painting to like turning heads, was when I realized that I could just manually grunt out work by just putting in dozens of hours of brushwork into stuff. And by doing that, I could, like, you know, give it enough time, I could paint anything theoretically. And it was when I started treating a lot of my paintings with that philosophy that like things really started to come together. And it feels like that's sort of the turn that you're coming to right now.
Well, thank you, Pete. That's really, really nice to hear.
And do you feel that? I mean, am I reading too much into it, or is this something you're experiencing also?
No, I'm happy with this piece. Like, there are things that I'm not happy about, things I know I want to improve, but I felt like I learned a bunch about color doing this piece.
Good.
Like and so I'm hoping I can like apply that next one and keep building on it. But I feel like I did learn something doing this that I hadn't been able to see before.
Great. Well, I want to give you a couple of notes before we part then. Okay, so like the experience you had with the gloves where you're like kind of going through and just like it feels like you have put a lot of attention into the gloves to like really capture the curvy leather and get it to feel right at a distance. I think that if you were a gun pointed to your head, you could probably do the same thing to the face. I think that there's probably a layer of detail further to go with the face. And I know these are like weekly studies, so I wouldn't be asking you to like go and put in like that many more hours into it. But if you're going to put tons of focus into something, generally the face is a good place to put it. But I mean, it's not universally true. Some of my favorite artists would do quite the opposite. But you know, what you were doing when you were pulling in colors like over the highlights by pulling greens in and then slowly glazing them over the top here, I think that's like what I would do to make the biggest changes to the face. Like the shadow here between the eyes is coming off a little dark. And so the solution to that would probably be to find a lighter color that's a little bit saturated and very lightly start to glaze that in a little bit. The shape of the head is feeling a little flat through the forehead, for instance. We can, if we look here, we can see it actually goes from like kind of darker to brighter as we get from like moved down the forehead. So that would be a case of like grabbing darker color and kind of trying to glaze it in light to be able to maybe bring the focus in off the forehead a little bit. Maybe doing the opposite. Like you've got this, it looks like the brightest highlight in the face right now is this corner of the mouth. And we can see that if we take that exact color and we start to bring it into the other places where we get a really bright highlight on the face, like across the nose here, it starts to bring it up quite a bit. I might even bring it up a little tiny bit more and build up that highlight on the front of the brow a little bit. Figuring out, like a big part of balancing this stuff is figuring out where in the painting is it brightest and then kind of smushing it out from there. So you can always take like, if you look at this and you say, well, the brightest points are right here, and right here, then you can find the color that's your brightest highlight. And lay in like a pure daub of paint. Boop. Boop. And then it's a question of turning down the opacity and smushing it out from there and seeing kind of how far do you smush it and where do you want to glaze it over to continue to slowly and manually build up the value rather than doing any kind of larger tweaks. It's
I've heard other people talk about this as like establishing the lightest light and the darkest dark.
Sure.
And it makes sense because it gives you like a reference point to interpolate all the other things.
Yeah, because one of the biggest things about painting, my point in saying like, oh well, there's like a lot of value in doing things in the most manual way possible. It's like when you're trying to paint it all out kind of manually, you know what you're doing is you're looking at everything relatively. Everything's very relative within the painting. So it's always like, I need to bring this up a shade, I need to bring this down a shade. So creating like a boundary, an upper and lower boundary for your work gives a certain amount of context to the kind of shifting. Because if you're like, oh, well, those highlights are really coming up too bright compared to everything else is looking a little dim. Well, then maybe you need to like glaze bigger chunks over the whole thing. Or maybe find just larger planes that you want to bring out and find a few select areas that you can kind of bring up in isolation. And those will like give you extra dimension. And you can really see it on the navigator size of things, where you start to get extra kind of 3D look out of it. And I mean, that's what I think that you did really well on the gloves, is getting that like range of contrast, and then the transitions between the lighter and darker areas all very precise. Figuring out how to do that on something as complex of a face is not a, spend 5 years to learn how to do it in isolation. Like, it's the sort of thing anyone can do if they put 100 hours into it. And as long as you're committed to like figuring out where like the boundaries of the work are, and that you've got a good structure to it, like all of this preparatory work that you've done here is like providing like a structure and a context for you to go in and make lots of little, like, this needs to be pushed up a little bit, this needs to be pushed down a little bit, I need to squish this in, I need to flatten this, round this out, and just pick away at it manually. You'll be able to get extraordinary results that you are far beyond what you thought you were capable of by just committing to making it like a lot of little brushstrokes. And it's super powerful. It's like totally within your realm of ability at this point, I think.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll give that a try. Like, it makes sense that I ended up with the corner of the mouth being the brightest, because that was actually the last thing I did on the face. I think I was sort of drifting a little bit in that direction. And if I'd gone back and tried to bound it both from brightness and darkness and also across space, then I probably could have gotten a more consistent result.
Yeah, and I think that every time you do something like this, if you really push yourself on just the brushwork side of things, you're going to find little insights into how you build stuff up, and you're going to find a lot of little learning lessons that are even hard to vocalize, but you'll intuitively understand them and build them up like very quickly, I think.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Pete. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. All right. Fawn is not here. Fawn. Okay. So some people have come in. Civic. Part of the problem, I think, is that some of these submissions were from 2 weeks ago when I gave out the assignment, and then I took off for the Thanksgiving holiday. Civic did some really interesting work here. They said coloring is still difficult for me, but I think I'm starting to improve. I'm especially struggling with filling larger areas like the coat here, but I hope that will get better with time. I thought this was a really interesting comment for a couple of reasons. Well, number one, I think that I really like the stylization here. There's an attempt to stylize the features quite a bit, but there's also a stylization to the rendering. There's also a lot of creative choices being made with outlines, as well as the very stylized linear detail inside of the hair, which is kind of unique. There's a lot of interesting creative choices, and this is just really fun to see. It's nice to see somebody trying out a lot of different stylized notes within a single piece. I think that filling out larger areas like the coat is really not that much of a concern here. There are so many points of interest throughout this piece, and there's a real hierarchy of interest because we get a lot of attention and detail around the face and hair. Then we get these really expressive hands, but they're much looser. And then the coat is out of the picture. It's it totally doesn't matter. It gets lost in the mix, with the bright red square behind it. There is so many other moments of contrast, moments of interest throughout this piece that capture my attention. Something as insignificant as the coat is truly lost on me. And so, what did I do that I managed to? There we go. So if I were to say anything about the coat, I would be all right, well, you can honestly get away with doing a lot less. You can, if you wanted to just flatten this even more and fill it primarily with texture, you could do that. With the way that this style is going, with the rendering on the face and the focus in all the right places, I think that you can actually really get away with downplaying a lot of the secondary elements here. And so outlines that I'm seeing, the bright outlines I'm seeing on some of these Accents on the coat don't feel 100% as necessary to me. I think that filling out the roundness of the shape just a little bit, the shape of the coat and the chest is like not really is kind of working here. So maybe, you could choose to go flat, or you could choose to go for kind of big roundness to it. You could see I was talking to Abarth about the sort of barrel of the torso here really being visible in the reference. We can bring that out a little bit if you wanted to, and you can do that with some really big, really chunky brush strokes without having to get into precision or detail or linear marks or anything. And as long as it kind of creates a rough gradient going for that create volume for the body, for the shoulders, I think that you're in excellent shape. And so I am just playing around here because it looks like you had fun with this, and I feel like I want to participate by painting on top of your piece here. But so what I'm doing here is, I could have flattened it further. That could be an interesting style. Personally, I like to fill out a lot of volume. You could see that with some big flat brush strokes like this. It's possible to fill out some volume a little bit without going into like rendering. And I think hopefully you think it complements your work well. Thank you for participating, Civic. It's great to see your stuff. I don't know if I've seen you around here before. Knight is doing like a super painterly digital brushy look that I think is really cool here. I thought this was interesting because I just got finished doing a bunch of custom brush stuff. These are the kinds of brushes I can't imagine myself ever using because I don't know how to make sense of them. I don't know how people make these and have them kind of work. I think there's something about these sort of repeated shapes that oh, I see. I think I might have just screwed up the name of my thing. Whatever. These little repeated shapes that like appear as a result of like digital brushes kind of having their stamp get repeated. I was like working really hard to make sure that my brushes don't do that. But there's something that looks so intentional and natural about it when some people use it. And I don't get it. I don't know how any of this stuff gets done. I think that the wiping out of the face here adds a lot of interest to this piece. I was saying some of my favorite artists don't actually put a ton of attention on the face. One of them is Yuming Lee. He's very popular right now. And he tends to like have the cast shadows over the eyes, flatten things out like this. And I think that if you can understand the broad shapes of the face in a way that, really demonstrates your intentional choice in like reducing the detail, that you can get away with really big swings like this. I also think that if you're doing a study and you want to stylize things, starting off with a really rough approximation like this, and then working in layers of detail further while leaving in some of this crustiness and messiness, like being selective about where you would work into something like this could be a really cool thing. I think that we can really clearly see the overall structure and values of this. And then, if anyone wanted to like take this one step further, that you could like go in and start to either work on rendering the face or pick just the hands or find some other aspect of this image to like boil down and render further into this. This is kind of like a way that I've seen people like oil painters work doing alla prima, where a lot of the big shapes are established first, and then the details are only carved in as like a very final step. Because with the alla prima, you can't build up over the details because everything remains wet the whole time. So I think it's a very efficient way of working, and it's a very like valuable skill to learn. So I think this is a really cool example of this style, and something I don't know if I'm ever going to repeat. I don't know how people do this with custom brushes. It's just always been a permanent point of curiosity for me. Nate is here. Nate showed up. Arrived just in time, Lamau. Nate, do you want to come up on stage and talk about your stuff a little bit? You want to raise your hand? If not, no worries. You don't have a mic? Sorry. Okay, no problem. Well, I gave you a lot of praise and said that if you want to take it further, you could take it further. I think it's cool, and I'm gonna thank you for participating. Oh, you heard all of it. Excellent, great, fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you for joining us. It's good to see your stuff. All right, so I don't want to do this twice. Fawn's not here, and Vlad's not here, but Vlad did keep a very good record of his overall process, and I thought it was really instructive to look at, so I want to take a look at it with you guys. Vlad says, I really wanted to do the crown piece last week, but missed the deadline, so I'm jumping on this now. I do these kind of stylized portrait studies every now and then anyways. I also include some progress pics. Yeah, Vlad's a very experienced artist. He's a professional. He's been around the community a bit, so I know what he's up to. And so, this is the sort of thing, like, he says, I do these now and again. When you do something now and again for as long as Vlad's been doing it, you get really darn good at it. I think that's not a super insightful thing to say, but, I think this is a really interesting first step. Typically what I'm talking about making these, I focus on, building up some structure first, and I like to go values into color. Vlad is going straight into it. No sketch, straight into color. The colors are in some places washed out and crazy. Like the redness of the lips looks crazy. The proportions of the face are wild. The overall proportions of the piece is not accurate to the original reference. And none of those things matter, because this is an initial step, and he's working in this very fluid way that allows him to, maybe we lasso a few pieces and resize them. And then we start to paint in the cracks. And then, some of the larger shapes of the face start to gain personality. And all of that messiness becomes an asset, because through it we get a lot of little accidental colors and mixing and creative moments that are then drawn upon as things tighten down and refine. It's not all mistakes to be fixed. It's simply a stepping stone in a process of progressive discovery. And so the next step here, we see it's just a lot of little changes, and the proportion difference in resizing things and scaling them makes a big, big difference. And then with a lot of that established, he's starting to tighten down. He's wiping out some of that uncovered areas in the background. They're showing the white through it, and starting to really establish the overall values. And then he's bringing in, instead of continuing to tighten and tighten and tighten, he's taking a step here to add more noise, add more mess. Mess is great to have, because cleaning up mess is a productive act. Whether you're doing it in your house or you're doing it in a painting, I think that making things screwed up gives you an opportunity to sort of selectively fix them in a way that creates interest. And so I think adding mess, adding texture like this can be a really useful step. I typically don't use photo textures like this. I bet Vlad's probably got a whole library of them. I used to have some that I would repeatedly use in my pieces back when I was first learning to paint. I haven't done that in a long time. It doesn't actually seem like that bad of an idea. I think for this, it really adds a little oomph to it, that it gets even better when you see him then paint over a lot of this crust. So as you see new paint comes in, it starts to smooth out. By making a mess and then cleaning it up kind of halfway, we end up with this controlled chaos where some of this texture is still very high contrast over here, but then you look in the upper left, and that little bit of extra wash over the top pushes it back and creates this balance between the areas that remain more textural and the areas that start to brush a little smoother, because the paint starts to smooth the whole thing out. And then the final step, we can see final balance and finishing. He's doing some blending modes, it looks like, to rebalance the lighting on the face a little bit, and making sure that all the last details and balancing some texture stuff out. But I think it's really cool. I think it's a cool style. And I think that like the willingness to keep things rough and keep things messy have really like demonstrated like the value of that mindset. I think that he's showing a good way of allowing the mess to be a thing that we want. Like we're always so worried about like, is this screwed up? Is this bad? Is this wrong? It's like, I don't think that that's really like what we need to worry about. Like the main thing that we're fighting against is the piece boring. And like by adding a lot of interesting elements, even if they're wrong, give us something to grasp onto that gives us like context for the choices that we're making. All right. Last one, we have Fawn. Fawn said, I finally did the homework. And so I saw, Fawn was happy to have finally participated in the homework. I was like, we'll bring Fawn up. Fawn's not here. Fawn, if you're catching this, sorry we couldn't have you today. I know I like messed with the scheduling on you, but maybe we'll catch you on some future time. Fawn says, I feel like I'm finally starting to fall into a style, though I think eventually I add some more stylistic choices once I grasp the fundamentals better and form more of a process. Right now, I feel like I fumble a lot and follow gut instincts rather than informed decisions, which is fine for the most part, but eventually I want to be able to teach in YouTube videos, and I can't exactly say just follow your gut and pray the art gods that it works. I mean, Fawn, I got to tell you, this is my primary problem. I believe in following your gut, and I believe in people working in different ways, and I am trying to teach while allowing for that to be true, and it does make it very hard to make prescriptive YouTube videos where you say, you should do this. Because I think that the more you learn about yourself and your style and your work, the more you go, there isn't a right and wrong way to do things. And it makes like broadcasting prescriptive lessons on YouTube or on a live stream or whatever really challenging. And so navigating the space between those is exactly where I'm at. And I got to tell you, it doesn't get better over time. I've been teaching for a long time. It's still very hard to do that. Fawn says, but yeah, I want my style to be more painterly and expressive, but I tend to end up tightening it all up and making it look like the reference instead of expressing myself and experimenting. Video here. I pulled the video thinking we would watch it together. I feel you. I feel you strong. The whole like wanting to just keep by the reference, just render it. That is also my first instinct. And it's like I want to bring more style into my own stuff. And what I was showing off with Vlad's work about making messes in order to like keep the things that you truly like about it, and then only like painting over the parts to like improve it. I think that can be a really productive approach to allowing things to remain more painterly. I think with Night stuff as well, trying to keep things looser, messier at first, rather than trying to keep them too tight, too organized early on, can be a real asset for helping that happen. I think that the approach that you're showing here is very good, very serious. Strong sketch at the beginning to establish the overall structure, building up the deepest shadows first, is creating a really good impression of a lot of these key features very early. It seems like a very reliable way of working. I think that one of the things that I would recommend if you want to keep things a little bit more painterly is I would try to block in bigger stuff earlier. I'm noticing from the way that you're working on this that you're really getting into the weeds on some of these smaller refinements very, very early. I think that keeping things broader and more gestural early on is going to give you a better result when it comes to that look that you're looking for, that more painterly look. I also don't love the brush you're using. It's got this, I don't know, it's got this like a bit of it's got an excessive amount of softness that's like, I find to be a little strange. I think that picking something that has a bit harder of an edge, this might be a case where I say, go ahead and try my new Size Flow brushes. I can link those in the chat. Go to huckleberryartinc.gumroad.com. You can get them for free forever. Give them a try. Let me know what you think. I think that if you want, the reason why, let me just go into my brushes really quick to explain what I like about them. With real paintbrushes, the way it works is that you press lightly and you just get the tip of the bristles, and then you push down and you get the body of the brush. And a lot of brushes, digital brushes, they don't do that. They get more opaque as you push harder. And so what you end up with is a lot of these marks that are kind of wishy-washy a little bit, because you're not like wanting to grind your hand down too much, and they tend to kind of very softly taper at the edge. If you want a painterly look, I think that working in a way that more simulates traditional paint might be helpful. Every single one of my brushes has this property, regardless of the tip shape. And you can see like it gives this more crusty, oil painty look to it, and it's easier to paint boldly with it because you don't have to worry about the saturation of the paint, coming in sort of softly as you're lightly pushing stuff around. It's going to come in thick and creamy. We want thick and creamy especially when we're doing big applications of paint early on. I think it'll keep you from hedging your bets too much, keep things soft at the beginning, and let me know how that works. Come back some future time, give a try out to my brushes, and then let me know if you think that helps fix your problem or if it drives you completely crazy and they don't make any sense. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. That's it for the session today. That's the last bit of feedback. I'm going to pull up the homework one more time for anybody who joined us late. I'm dropping it here in the chat, and I'm going to drop it in the homework section. Oh, I have my Stream Deck plugged in so I can quickly move between these channels. I made hotkeys specifically for this. All right. I'm going to say make this study extra 80s. If you dare. If you think that's possible. Oh, did I manage to hang up on myself and come back in? This is awesome. This hotkey totally isn't working as intended. Great. All right, that hotkey totally doesn't work as intended. That's awesome. All right. Let me get this going again. Did I drop out that whole time while I was explaining from the other channel? It's like a hang up button instead of going back. Yeah, get it sent back to the 80s. All right. Just 5 seconds? All right. Yeah, okay. So my Stream Deck hotkey there, didn't test it out in advance. And when I press the button to come back to the stage, it just hangs up the call. All right. Anybody have any questions? We've got a couple of minutes. I actually ended this one early for the first time, maybe ever. If anybody has any questions or wants to chat about anything for 5 minutes, I'm open. I'm available for you. Otherwise, I'm going to let you go. Don't want to take up too much of your time. And then we'll see you next week. How many bonus points for using your brushes? I mean, 1 million bonus points. Since we're not counting points, I'll give you as many points as you want. You do get double bonus points for sharing it with your friends and getting them to download it. I am very open for feedback on these. I'm sure there's problems. I'm sure there's compatibility issues. Please let me know. Just DM me. My DMs are very easy to get a hold of over DMs. I'll see them. I'll get back to you. Anybody who wants to donate their time to help me make these things perfect while I'm like working up to a full release, it would be hugely appreciated. Okay, Jade says tried them, they work fine. That's good to hear. Well, thank you, Jade. Thank you everyone who did the homework this week. I'm looking forward to see your homework next week. Thanks everybody. It's great to see here every time. You make this part of my week excellent every single time. So I'll see you guys around. Goodbye.